Hello, everyone. I call this meeting to order now.
Please have everyone mute mics in the room. I know I love the sound of my voice, but not that much. All right. Bienvenue à la réunion.
Welcome to meeting number 24 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. I would like to acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people.
A reference of Tuesday, May the 12th, 2022. The committee is meeting to study and to the Bill C-11, which is an act to amend the Broadcast Act and to make related consequential amendments to other acts. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, pursuant to the House of Commons November the 25th, 2021 agreement. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Per the directive of the Board of Internal Economy on March the 10th, 2022, all those attending the meeting in person must wear a mask, except for members who are at their place during proceedings. And I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, you can click on the mic. I'm sure you all know how to do this already, but I'll just go over it quickly. You can click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you will see a little globe, and that is what you press if you want to have interpretation. Those on the floor can actually have the floor will give you interpretation there. Now, please wait so that I can recognize you by name before you speak. For those participating by video conference, you click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. And actually a reminder that all comments should be addressed to the chair. I want to welcome the witnesses who are here today, and I wanted to say that welcome. And I wanted to also say that you have 5 minutes for each organization, not each person. So you can kind of decide amongst yourself who's going to use up what time. But I will give you a 30-second, you'll hear me, I'll just go 30 seconds. Because if I hold up a piece of paper, most people don't look at it anyway. So that's how we'll begin. And I want to just read out the list of witnesses that we have today. We have the Canadian Union of Public Employees, and representing them are Nathalie Blais, Research Representative, and Tulsa Valin Laundrie, VP of Communication. Independent Broadcasters Group, Joël Fortune, Legal Counsel, and Luc Perrault, Strategic Advisor. The Forum for Research and Policy and Communications, Monica Auer, Executive Director, and Music Canada, Patrick Rogers, CEO. And so, without further ado, I will begin with the Canadian Union of Public Employees. And I don't know who will speak, but I am just turning on my little 5-minute thing here for you. So I'll give you your 30-second when we're ready to get you to stop. Okay, thank you. So begin. Who is speaking for the Canadian Union of Public Employees? Ms. Blais or Ms. Laundrie? Yes, okay. Thank you very much. Will you begin, please?
Madame la Présidente, membres du comité, merci pour l'invitation.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to discuss Bill C-11 with you. My name is Tulsa Valin Laundrie. I'm the Vice President of QP Quebec for the communications sector, which represents nearly 6,700 broadcasting workers in Quebec. I'm accompanied by my colleague Nathalie Blais, a consultant with QP's research department. Our members work in all types of broadcasting companies, whether in distribution, radio, local, specialty, and community television, or the internet. They actively participate in our democracy by producing local, regional, national, and international news, and they are involved in the production of entertainment programming just like independent producers. This is a particularity of Quebec, and would like to draw your attention to this point. Bill C-11 is very important to us. Since 2014, we have made numerous interventions, alone or in coalition, to ask that the government establish legislative and regulatory fairness between traditional broadcasting companies and online companies which operate in Canada, such as Netflix or Spotify. The impact of these foreign companies on our industry has been dramatic. In just a few short years, television stations that were considered cultural icons have become loss-making, putting Canadian jobs, information, and programming at risk. C11 aims to improve the competitive position of our broadcasters so that they can continue to produce and present programming that is relevant to us, while providing the quality, well-paying jobs that the Canadian economy needs. By bringing the web giants into the Canadian broadcasting system to regulate them, the bill will put Canadian companies on a level playing field with their foreign competitors. It will also protect our cultural and economic sovereignty. We need new legislation quickly to restore broadcasters to profitability and protect jobs, but in its current form, Bill C-11 contains too many uncertainties. Essential amendments are needed to strengthen the bill in order to avoid the possibility that the future Streaming Online Act will be challenged in the courts as soon as it is implemented. Such an eventuality would have unfortunate consequences for workers, for Canadian broadcasting companies, and for the cultural sector. We are therefore proposing some fundamental amendments to clarify the scope of the regulation and ensure its success. First, let's get one thing straight. C11 is not intended to regulate the entire Internet, as some witnesses claim. That is not true. The bill is actually aimed at online businesses operating in whole or in part in Canada under Section 4.2 of the Broadcasting Act, which is unchanged in C11. The reactions we have heard so far suggest that the intent of Parliament needs to be more clearly expressed in the bill to avoid any ambiguity. Now, with that, I'd like to hand it over to Nathalie. QP Quebec suggests an amendment to Section 3.1a to clarify what the Canadian broadcasting system is in the context of an open market on the Internet, and ultimately to avoid the sale of Canadian broadcasting undertakings to foreign interests. The current wording creates uncertainty by distinguishing between the Canadian broadcasting system and foreign broadcasting undertakings. We propose a description based on operation in Canada to make clear the intent of the legislation. In addition, the CRTC's mandate and responsibility should be strengthened with respect to the key objectives of Canadian broadcasting policy. These objectives are those in Section 3.1, which are distinguished from the others by the fact that they are drafted in the present tense and place their achievement at the forefront of the CRTC's responsibilities. These objectives are Canadian ownership and control of broadcasting undertakings, Canadian programming, employment in the Canadian broadcasting system, and the provision of broadcasting services in English and French to all Canadians. The production of an annual report is proposed in Section 5 of the Act to strengthen the Commission's oversight role and accountability with respect to these primary objectives. Finally, we suggest an extension of the CRTC's regulatory authority to the funding of local news and community television, strengthening Canadian broadcasting policy with regard to employment in Canada and by broadcasters' production teams, a change in the definition of the community component, and the provision allowing the CRTC to review the rates of online undertakings distributing programming in order to establish regulatory symmetry with distribution undertakings that are the traditional type. Thank you for listening.
Much, Ms. Blay, right on the nose. And now the next group will be the Independent Broadcasters Group, and that would be either Mr. Fortune or Mr. Perrault, who would begin first. For 5 minutes, please.
I will begin, Madam Chair. Hello. Hello, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Luc Perrault. I'm a strategic consultant for the Stingray Group, which is a member of the Independent Broadcast Group. also known under its acronym of IBG. I am with Joël Fortune, who is a legal consultant of IBG. Our association consists of 13 broadcasting companies, independent companies, which are not affiliated with the cable channels. We offer Canadians a wide variety of content, local news, information, weather news and urgent alerts, documentaries, other entertainment programming, Canadian cinema and best films of the world, music, and others. We do this in French, in English, and Indigenous languages, and 25 languages, other languages.
To better reflect the Internet and ever-increasing presence of online broadcasting services in Canada. Our primary concern is that Bill C-11 restricts the CRTC authority to supervise a critical element of online activity, the oversight of the distribution, discoverability, and fair treatment of Canadian apps and services online. Let me be clear, we're not talking about access to social media services. What we're talking about is access to closed platform operated by internet services like Roku, Amazon, Apple TV, and by Canadian operators like Rogers, Bell, and Quebecor. These large companies use the internet to distribute third-party programming services in the same way and compete directly with cable and satellite. In the United Kingdom, the government has announced that it intends to empower its regulator, Ofcom, to ensure that UK services are offered and treated fairly by these online platforms. Ofcom will have a dispute resolution function to address issues that will arise between online platforms and online services. In the United States, the Federal Communications Commission has already looked in depth into the regulatory treatment of virtual MVPDs. We call them virtual BDUs in our system. The FCC review relates to whether these virtual BDUs should have carriage obligations for local television signals. This review remains open. In other words, other major jurisdictions, including the US, are already seized of online distribution issues. Their expert regulatory agencies, Ofcom and the FCC, are exercising or being given the jurisdiction that IBG, GDI, and other proposed include in Bill C-10, but which are now absent.
Which authorities are we talking about? First, the ability to set the terms of carriage, if necessary, for certain designated services. This could include, for example, APTN or TV5 Uni or other existing 918 services that are now made available to Canadians due to CRTC rules. Without CRTC intervention, these services would not exist today. Second, the CRTC should have a general authority to create terms of service that relate to the distribution of online services and that go beyond individual services like APTN or TV5. For example, that authority could be used to ensure that local television services are offered in their own local markets by certain online services. Third, the CRTC should have the authority to engage in dispute resolution involving online services and access to online distribution platforms. They exercise that authority today for cable and satellite distribution, and internet distribution could well replace them in the future. The CRTC's powers should keep pace. We've submitted our proposed amendments to the committee. They are all directed to this issue of distribution and are meant at heart to preserve the CRTC's authority to oversee certain business-to-business relationships that arise between programming services and distributors, to preserve the competitiveness of our market, its openness to Canadian services, and the advancement of broadcasting policy objectives.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fortune. Just again under the wire. Very good. Now, I'd like to go to the Forum for Research and Policy in Communications. And again, for 5 minutes, please, is it Ms. Orr? Yes? For 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for inviting the Forum to appear today. We undertake empirical and policy research in communications and participate in a range of CRTC proceedings. The Forum strongly agrees that Canada needs a new statute to serve the public interest by ensuring the availability of and Canadians' access to high-quality Canadian news and entertainment programming, and to serve our economy's needs for jobs and investment. But we fear the contradictions, gaps, and loopholes that exist in C11 will thwart Parliament's objectives. Our written submission recommended changing 8 aspects of C11. As other witnesses have already addressed some of these issues, I will highlight just 3 points today. First, while the current Broadcasting Act and Bill C11 state that the best way to implement Canada's broadcasting policy is through a single independent public authority, Bill C11 erodes this independence by handing Cabinet the power in subsection 7.7 to override the CRTC when it exercises any or all of 39 of the CRTC's powers in Part 2. New Part 2.2 also lets Cabinet regulate 8 administrative violations. C11 also leaves intact the existing limit on CRTC decision-making independence enabled by the chairperson's power to decide who decides. That is, which CRTC commissioners may actually make decisions. Rather than weakening the CRTC's decision-making independence, C11 should strengthen it. Second, gaps in C11 will make current serious problems with the CRTC's transparency, accountability, and timing even worse. The Section 5 regulatory policy now ignores the public interest and discourages the CRTC from regulating if doing so may be a burden. Yet it is next to impossible for the public to refute claims about future burdens or to make the case for stronger regulation to implement the broadcasting policy. Despite collecting programming data from Canadian radio and TV programming services for half a century, the CRTC has not published such data in decades. C11 should require the CRTC to report annually on Section 3's implementation to enable oversight by Parliament and Canadians alike, and should set a more rational test for undue regulatory burdens. C11 does propose that the CRTC publish relevant evidence before consultations affecting minority language communities, but it should do so before all consultations, and CRTC determinations should be signed by those who make them. As for timeliness, divining when the CRTC will decide matters is now based on guesses or gossip. C11 ignores this problem and makes it worse, since those accused of administrative violations may wait forever to be formally cleared of wrongdoing. The bill should require the CRTC to complete its investigations within a reasonable period. In brief, this bill is a rare opportunity to reduce problems with the CRTC's transparency, accountability, and timeliness. Finally, and third, drafting loopholes may in any event stymie C11's implementation. In particular, subsection 2.3a excludes online programs that are ancillary to a business's primary activities. This may simply encourage creative business structuring and court challenges, and is at odds with the existing requirement in Section 9 that the CRTC exempt broadcasters unable to contribute materially to the broadcasting policy, and requiring offline but not online distributors to negotiate reasonable terms of carriage with programming services will simply hurt, if not kill off, Canada's small and medium-sized domestic programming services, fueling in the interim calls for Me Too deregulation. If C11 wants the single system envisaged in subsection 3 sub 2, it should clearly define its reach and treat like media alike. To conclude, our fear is that if left as written, C11 will simply not achieve Parliament's stated objectives, and even worse, that court challenges of its implementation by the CRTC will create long delays and cost Canada and those working in its creative sectors quite dearly. Fixing C11's drafting problems will strengthen Canada's communication system by ensuring that it's an independent regulatory authority actually serving the public interest by making evidence-based decisions in a fair and timely manner. We strongly support the general purpose of C11, but thoughtful revision now gives you the opportunity to craft outstanding 21st century legislation, and we are confident that that is your committee's intent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I will go to Music Canada, Patrick Rogers.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with the committee to discuss Bill C11. Music Canada is the trade association for Canada's major labels. Sony Music Entertainment Canada, Universal Music Canada, and Warner Music Canada. Canada's major sign and partner with Canadian artists, helping them achieve commercial success in Canada and export that music abroad. Overwhelmingly, it is artists partnered with major labels that Canadians listen to on the radio, stream, or hear synced to their favorite TV shows. I'm in the enviable position of telling the committee that we support Bill C-11's core principles of accessibility of Canadian content through regulating broadcasting on the internet. Canada's commercial radio rules, developed 5 decades ago, were integral to today's successful Canadian music industry, with Canada's majors leading the way. Those rules open new opportunities for careers and professional development for artists, labels, studios, managers, venues, and an entire emerging Canadian music industry. That commercial success, in turn, enabled business to reinvest in the next generation of talent. In fact, I like to think that our members have served as an example for this bill. Section 31F.1 requires making the greatest practical use of Canadian creative and other human resources. That is the business model of Canada's major labels. We have offices in Toronto and Montreal full of Canadians making Canadian music for the Canadian market and the world. In a global digital marketplace, success in Canada is a stepping stone to international success. Music is one of the most recognizable and successful exports. Canada is the 8th largest streaming market in the world, and out of the top 10 most streamed artists in the world, 3 of them are Canadian. Those names you all know: Bieber, The Weeknd, and Drake. But I want to tell you about some of today's biggest Canadian success stories that perhaps you haven't heard of. Ali Ghadi, raised in Mississauga, is an artist of Iraqi descent who surpassed 3.5 billion streams for his 2019 single, It's You. Tate McRae, a singer-songwriter from Calgary, one of the world's artists to watch, held down the #1 spot for 5 weeks on Billboard's Emerging Artist chart, and with over 3.2 billion career streams. And Ellie Rose, a Montrealer named Breakthrough Artist of the Year at the 2020 Disc Awards, with numerous hits, has 14 million global streams and counting. These are just a few of the names of the next generation of Canadian talent, and they're finding success in streaming that maybe they wouldn't have found in radio alone. These successes come from both the incredible talent of these artists and from the investments made by our members, publishers, indies, and the platforms who license the music. Turning to the bill, we support the bill as the minister describes it. We agree when he says the CRTC should not regulate the algorithms of online services or user-generated content. We hope the committee will clarify the bill text to clearly reflect the minister's intent. The committee has now heard about the CRTC's potential to reach into algorithms and to regulate user-generated content. That wiggle room in the bill, compared to the minister's certainties, was at first confusing. But following the outgoing chair of the CRTC's testimony here, that wiggle room is concerning. This can be fixed by honing the language of the bill to reflect the minister's stated intent. The bill can be amended to clarify the prohibition on the CRTC regulating algorithms, and the language regarding professional content can be sharpened to reflect the minister's statement of no cat videos. The global music industry has just come back from nearly 2 decades of decline. The growth reflects the hard work of companies like ours to ensure that music uses are licensed and artists are paid when their music is played. But we know what happens when Canadians feel there's too much friction between them and what they want to hear. They will find their music elsewhere. If regulation proves too burdensome on our industry partners, we know that consumers will move to unregulated spaces, which by definition will be harder to license, which will mean a devaluation of music, making it harder for artists to be paid when their music is played. That flies in the face of the good intentions of this bill. To that end, I ask the committee to listen carefully to the platforms that will be regulated. They are our business partners, and they are where our artists and labels increasingly make a living in the 21st century.
30 seconds.
And ultimately, they are the people who bring you your favorite artists to your phone, your car, and your living room. In conclusion, this is an important bill with real-world goals. I look forward to answering any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. I now go to Disney. Is it Mr. Farris or Mr. Ferris?
Ferris.
Farris. Mr. Farris, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee for inviting me here today. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss the important relationship between Canada and the Walt Disney Company, as well as Bill C-11. Canada is one of Disney's top 4 production markets. In the last 3 years, our content spend in Canada across all of our production companies was approximately $3 billion on content to be featured on multiple platforms for worldwide distribution. We produced 6 of our most recent feature films in Canada. In 2021, we produced 18 TV and VOD original series in Canada, with Disney Plus Originals offering a source of growth for productions in Canada. Indeed, when Disney Plus launched, 3 of the 6 originals on the platform were produced in Canada. We have also produced in Canada uniquely Canadian stories. Barkskins, produced by National Geographic, tells a unique Quebec story following 2 French families over a 300-year period, beginning with their arrival in New France. The Barkskins production team worked closely with the Wendat Nation to ensure historical accuracy and respect. Turning Red, a Pixar animation film released on Disney Plus on March 11th, is a love story to growing up in Canada, created and directed by Canadian award winner Damashi. We are also producing a series based on the award-winning Canadian novel Washington Black. It is important to note that Barkskins, Turning Red, and Washington Black do not qualify as Canadian programs under the CRTC's current definition, notwithstanding their unique Canadian stories. Our close relationship with Canada is not limited to productions, but includes a permanent physical footprint with state-of-the-art and innovative facilities staffed by high-skilled talent. 2 of Disney's production companies have a physical presence in Canada and are expanding to fuel growth in the audiovisual sector, including infrastructure and skills development. Industrial Light and Magic, a visual effects subsidiary of Lucasfilm, has one of its 5 global offices in Vancouver, employing 500 people at any given time. ILM is expanding its footprint in Vancouver, building a 20,000 square foot virtual production stage. The Stagecraft LED system will ensure that Vancouver continues to be one of the most innovative visual effects hubs in the world. In August 2021, Disney Animation Studios announced that it will open its first production facility outside of Burbank, California, in Vancouver, hiring 400 high-skilled employees over the next 2 years. Disney also works with independent Canadian production companies, helping them grow and establish themselves as leaders in their fields. 2 important examples are Mercury Filmworks in Ottawa, an animation studio with which Disney has worked on at least 10 productions, and Omnifilm Entertainment based in Vancouver, a live-action production company with which we have worked on at least 5 productions. Madam Chair and committee members, I understand that a main motivating driver behind Bill C-11 is if you benefit from Canada, you should contribute to Canada. I hope that in the last few minutes that I have successfully demonstrated Disney's proud contributions to Canada and its creative ecosystem. We hope to invest further in Canada, and a flexible regulatory regime will allow us to maximize those future investments. From our perspective, a flexible regulatory regime would recognize that each company offers a different proposition to its consumers. Accordingly, consumer expectations flow from a company's particular offering. Disney Plus is unique in that it predominantly offers content from Disney's own brands, Disney, Pixar, Marvel, Star Wars, National Geographic, and Star. Given this unique offering, we hope that Bill C-11 will allow each company to contribute to the health of the Canadian AV ecosystem in a manner consistent with the service it offers, thereby fueling consumer choice, benefit, and diversity. As I noted, Disney is proud of our contributions to Canada, but they differ from those of Canadian broadcasters by the very nature of the content we offer. For example, Canadian broadcasters devote a significant portion of their content spend on news and sports, content that Disney does not produce in Canada. We would welcome the opportunity to work with you to ensure that Bill C-11 recognizes and embraces such differences. The Motion Picture Association of Canada will be filing proposed amendments to the committee in writing, and the Walt Disney Company fully subscribes to these amendments. Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. I look forward to answering any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ferris. And now that that ends our question and answer period. Our witness period, and we're going to move into the question and answer period. Now, this is going to begin with a round of 6 minutes, just to let witnesses know that that 6 minutes includes the question and the answer. So I shall begin for 6 minutes with the Conservative Party, John Nader. John, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, thank you to our witnesses for their testimony this morning. It's been an interesting morning thus far, and looking forward to the question and comments as well. I want to start with Mr. Ferris from the Disney Corporation. You'd mentioned three very specific examples of productions that told Canadian stories, were developed with Canadian content, but aren't considered Canadian under the CRTC's Canadian content principles. Could you expand on this a little bit and talk about how that works as a detriment to your organization, or perhaps a challenge might be a better word, when you're producing what many of us would consider Canadian content, but yet isn't considered Canadian content under the CRTC rules? If you could give us some thoughts on that.
Go ahead, Mr. Ferris.
Thank you for the question, MP Nader. I would begin by saying every program that is produced in Canada contributes to the overall health of the Canadian AV ecosystem by training skilled workers and developing infrastructure. We also sometimes tell stories, as I mentioned, whether it's Barkskins, Turning Red, or Washington Black, that tell truly Canadian stories. But because the Walt Disney Company owns the intellectual property, even if the significant talent, if you could meet the point system in the definition of Canadian content today, it could not qualify as Canadian content. Ironically, on the other hand, there may be content that is produced in the United States that does not tell a Canadian story, but nonetheless, because it meets the point system of the particular talent, high-level talent that is creative talent that is working on the program, it would constitute Canadian content, because it perhaps is owned by a company that has majority ownership by Canadians. What we're calling for is a flexible system around Canadian content that allows each one of us to contribute to the AV ecosystem in a manner consistent with the service that we offer. As I mentioned in my opening statement, Disney Plus is unique in the video streaming space in that it is we largely and predominantly distribute our own proprietary content across the 6 brands that we own. And therefore, that means that's IP that we own. So from the nature of our business, there needs to be flexibility introduced into the definition of Canadian content, both to deal with the irony that I outlined, but also to allow companies like the Walt Disney Company to maximize how we contribute to the Canadian AV ecosystem. And I think there can be a very simple fix in this, and that is there are several criteria set out in the draft legislation, whether it's IP ownership, whether it is the creative talent that participates, and whether it's a creative story. Not any single one of them should be determinative of what constitutes Canadian content. So there can be flexibility incorporated into the definition.
Thank you very much for that. I appreciate that commentary. And I'm going to move on to Mr. Rogers here in the room with Music Canada. You'd mentioned a little bit about the wiggle room, which was first questionable and now concerning, and the need for clarity within the piece of legislation to confirm that the algorithms wouldn't be effective, to confirm that user-generated content would be excluded. Do you have specific suggestions for the legislation itself in terms of what parts of the legislation ought to be changed, whether it's 4.2, whether it's other parts of the legislation? What would you suggest to the committee ought to be considered when we're doing the amendments at clause by clause?
Well, Madam Chair, I thank the member for the question. I think we divide this in two pieces, but the heart of it is, frankly, we think the minister's right. When the minister says no algorithms and no to cat videos, we think the language in the bill should reflect that. On algorithms, I would say that Section 9.18 can be amended to make it less about that particular section and more about the Act, and therefore prohibiting requirements regarding algorithms in the anything from the Act, and we can provide that language as a follow-up. In regards to user-generated content, I would say that the individual platforms are probably the best to get hard language on it, but I would tell you that we support that. And I would just go back to, again, my opening statement about this. This has gone from a hypothetical, nervous lawyers in the back of the room concern that the language isn't clear enough, to following the CRTC chair's explanation that there is wiggle room, that this is now something that we think the committee should address to, again, reflect what the minister has said.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. And I'm going to turn for my last little bit of time to Ms. Monica Auer from the Forum for Research and Policy and Communications. You'd made a comment about the timelines and the timeliness of the CRTC. I think you talked about based on rumors, guesses, and gossip. I'm not sure if I had that written down exactly, but if the CRTC is going to be given this additional responsibility through C11 and down the road through C18 as well, how do you see that affecting the timeliness and the responsiveness of the CRTC going forward, given this new scope of responsibilities they'll receive through this piece of legislation?
40 seconds, Ms. Auer.
I think it's likely that you'll see continuing delays. The CRTC has had its resources increase over the last 10 years. That's true. On the other hand, delays have simply increased in the last 10 years in terms of licensing decisions. You're probably familiar with the CBC was coming up on now nearly 10 years of a license, thanks to the CRTC's administrative extensions.
Thank you very much. 40 seconds left. John, I don't know that you can do anything with that.
Oh, Madam Chair, you underestimate me.
Yes, I walked into that, John. I think it's now, I think we've used up those 14 seconds. And now I'm going to go to the Liberals, Ms. Hepner, Lisa Hepner. Lisa, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for your testimony today. I would like to start with either Mr. Fortune or Mr. Perrault from the Independent Broadcasters Group. I know that you represent small broadcasters, and I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit, I know you touched on this in your opening, but to the environment right now for small broadcasters up against international platforms, and how important is it for this legislation to pass in terms of the broadcast environment out there right now?
Well, maybe I can start with that. Maybe I can start and then let Luc pick up. It is a challenging environment right now. Obviously, change is upon us. I think a lot of the challenges faced by independent broadcasters stem from the structure of the Canadian industry itself, not just the international environment. As you know, Canada has a consolidated and vertically integrated communications environment, and the regulatory environment has been changed over the last decade or so. Really to favor more, it's said it favors competition, and that's fair, but what has been the outcome of that competition? At IBG, we've conducted studies that have shown that by and large, it turns out that in our environment, the smaller independent players tend to do less well than the larger vertically integrated players. And a lot of that, I mean, it naturally follows. If you own the means of distribution, there are more opportunities to provide advantages to your own services. So that's kind of the domestic environment in which we operate, and that has a big impact on how we're faring. And we're concerned about some of those disadvantages of our domestic environment now being compounded by similar phenomena in the global online environment, where we're also dealing with players that own the means of distribution. They own platforms. They have some of their own content services. So we're quite worried about replicating that environment and then bringing it in to Canada without sufficient support for independent services. But Luc, maybe you have some comments as well.
I know it seems straightforward and simple, but could you just describe for us why it's important to support local independent broadcasters as well as the big guys?
Well, Luc, do you want to go with that, Luc?
Yeah. To be honest with you, when we're and I'm looking at this in a more global perspective because Stingray services are offered in over 110 countries, and we have over 130 million subscribers. So negotiations are going well, but to a certain extent, some platforms are now moving towards exclusive categories. So, for example, one platform will do a deal with a large music provider, and this will become the only music provider on that platform. So all of other music services like Stingray, for example, would be excluded. And that means that we're going to make less money, but also all the content we offer and a lot of Canadian content won't be available nor here nor on the international scene. So that's why Ofcom in the UK has said, well, we're going to stop this, and we're going to make sure that in the UK, even if some exclusive deals are made for categories or genres, British content will be made available.
And
Lisa, you have
I have 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Yeah. Could you just expand a little bit on that point? I kind of lost my thought there. Okay, let me move on. To QP, en Québec, on a une loi sur la diffusion.
There is a 1991 law on broadcasting. Could you possibly comment on how this legislation, this bill, protected the environment in Canada in general? Do you think it was important to have a broadcasting law? It was fundamental, in fact. Thank you for the question. If it wasn't for the current broadcasting bill and the CRTC regulation, we would no longer probably have local news in regional TV stations. When I started to take part in the labor union in the mid-2000s, we had local stations that had Canadian programming obligations, which was at 3 hours and 10 minutes by week. It is very little time per day, as you can imagine. So it was through efforts and interventions with the CRTC, through license renewals, that we have managed to increase this minimum to 5 hours. So it was a difficult period. So that is why we are asking that there be a reinforcement of the Canadian broadcasting policy when it comes to employment in Canada and when it comes to the financing of local information, news, and community television. CRTC at the moment does not have real regulatory powers to create production funds, and of doing this on an individual basis, maybe when there's a large procedure that impacts all cable channels, when that's, I think, what happened in 1993. But in Section 11.11, there should be additional provisions so that CRTC has the power to provide financing, additional financing to local news and channels. That would be ideal.
Thank you, Ms. Blais. And I now go to, for the Bloc québécois, Monsieur Martin Champeau. Martin, 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to all of our witnesses for appearing today. It has been enlightening, and your opinions are very useful for us. I will start with Madam Blais. 31.31a, Section 31a. There is an amendment that's proposed, so a version of this section on Canadian property. The Canadian radio broadcasting system should focus on Canadian content, with the exception of foreign undertakings that provide Canadian content. So you suggest to include including all undertakings that have operations in Canada. But can you elaborate maybe a bit more on that? What do you mean by this? Well, first of all, we expanded the ending part of the second part of the proposal because there was a bit of uncertainty when it comes to the limits of the Canadian broadcasting system. A court might eventually interpret and say that foreign broadcasting companies are not part of the Canadian system. And the opposite could also be true. So there was uncertainty. So if you will, we could actually ask the following question: having modified the section, how do we then interpret Canadian ownership of content, which has been decided on by the court in 1998, and the court had said at that point that the federal legislature did not limit the domain for these undertakings. It is rather envisaged that it should be the property, intellectual property of Canadian undertakings. So this was, in a way, maybe this could have backfired, if you will, but the section as it is allows for foreign ownership to a certain extent. And there was a report in 2003 which actually did some calculations by using de facto control, and they concluded that 46.7% of Canadian broadcasting undertakings could be foreign entities without harming Canadian ownership and the Canadian system. So we believe that there is a lot of sufficient wiggle room, if you will. There is there can be foreign companies that can be operating partly or completely in Canada without modifying Section 3(1)A, or otherwise we should specify what the broadcasting system is and whether it is it's closed or not. I don't know if Tulsa would like to add something. I would like to draw your attention to another section, if you will, because we have limited time. 3(1)F, if you can talk about that. A very important article. There is an amendment that you're bringing forward, which is also very important. There's a nuance in there that in 3(1)F, I'm sure you are very familiar with the section, but it's a question of calling on a maximum of Canadian human resources and creative resources. So if I'm not mistaken, there's a bit of wiggle room for foreign undertakings here under the section. Can you please explain why you would like to see an amendment? Well, in fact, we are telling the Commission that employment should be predominantly Canadian. So there's a lot of flexibility. Predominantly means 51%, and maximum would be 100%. So 51 to 100% of your employees should be Canadian broadcasting undertakings. Now, if the language or the format doesn't allow it, those might be exceptions, but the employment questions are not really very well evaluated by the CRTC. I was talking about local news a couple of minutes ago. So if you look into the reports of the CRTC, there are many undertakings that do not have Canadian employees at all. So we also sort of do see very minimal employment numbers. What are these people doing? Are they really engaging in broadcasting activities per se? So all of this could be improved if the CRTC had a more strict responsibility. So this conditional clause, if you will, in 3(1)F, it becomes and this objective of having a majority of Canadian employees, and that makes the bill a bit more stringent. Thank you. Mr. Perrault, in your opening remarks, you talked about services that have to do with Section 9(1)H. The example, I think, is very clear for everyone. So what happens if the modifications you're proposing to 9(1)H are not carried forward? What happens in that case? Well, the FCC in the U.S. tries to do something. I'll try to explain it in connection to that. When the Great when the big digital companies that started taking more and more airtime, local stations in the U.S. started saying, okay, we need to reach out to our citizens, our public, our audiences, and we have to have shows on these services, on these platforms. So we could very easily deliver through Netflix or Amazon or other platform local news because that is feasible. But when local TV stations said this to the FCC in the U.S., here in Canada, we decided as a country to have APTN, TV5 services similar to these that could also be made available. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. And now for the New Democratic Party, Mr. Julian Peter. 6 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Merci à notre...
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses that have appeared today. Thank you for the information you have shared with us. Even though there are improvements that could be made, this bill in general, at least this is my impression, is that you find it to have important objectives. So this is an important point that should be considered for the committee. There are points in which the bill could be improved, but at its core, the bill is doing good things well. So when it comes to the question of Canadian employment and 31F, Section 31F, there are those who are saying that this should be strengthened and really turned into an obligation when it comes to Canadian employment. Could you comment maybe on the importance of this particular point? And if there aren't any amendments that are brought forward to this section, what could be the result of that? Okay, I'll begin. It is important to reduce the uncertainty so that Section 31F has some uncertainty, and it has been this way since 1991. And I was talking about local television. At the time, there was only 3 hours and 10 minutes of programming, around 2003, 2004 even, per week. That was the amount. In 1990s, the amount we had was a lot higher. So the section did not give the sufficient push to the CRTC so that it would make sure that we would keep on the one hand Canadian programming and Canadian employment on the other. Thank you very much. So not taking into account this point, if you will, could be problematic when it comes to Canadian employment. Yes, it could continue the inertia of the CRTC, if you will, in terms of their stance on Canadian employment. Thank you. I would like to now continue with the Independent Broadcasters Group, Mr. Perrault and Mr. Fortune. You are really talking about leveling the playing field, and I would like to try and understand the following. In the context of this bill, having a more level playing field, what does it look like when it comes to discussions between independent broadcasters and the larger communication corporations in Canada?
To start, Mr. Julian, thank you for your question. There's a gap now in the bill. That's the main thing. That's our key point. There's a gap. Right now, the Broadcasting Act clearly covers the activities of cable and satellite companies. They're called distribution undertakings. That is clearly covered in the Act. There's a regulatory regime, and ultimately the CRTC has clear jurisdiction to ensure that all players are treated fairly and that everybody makes an appropriate contribution to Canadian broadcasting. C11 goes a little bit along that path, but it doesn't create a similar environment for online distributors. These are the platforms that, like Roku and others, that make available programming services of third parties on their platforms. And increasingly, our own Canadian cable and satellite companies are going to take this route. They're going to take their services online. They're going to use the internet to deliver third-party programming services. And our concern is that if the Commission will not have the same type of authority in that environment that it has now in the cable and satellite environment. So ultimately, I think we're going to look at a substantial weakening of how Canadian programming services are delivered to Canadians in our own market. And I think you heard from Mr. Danks last week that access by Canadian services to the domestic market is really a precondition for global access on these platforms. We need to use our own market to our own advantage, and to that end, and the Commission have sufficient authority to make sure Canadian services are present and treated fairly.
Thank you very much for that. I'd like to go on to Madame Auer. You raised the issue of CRTC and responding in a reasonable way. That is obviously a concern. And I wanted you to respond a little bit more in depth in terms of where you see the problems in CRTC responding in such an important area of jurisdiction. That the fact that they are not responding within a reasonable period now is a matter of concern. There is no doubt. How do you feel? How do you see the CRTC responding in a more timely manner? You've suggested amendments to the bill, but are there other things as well that the CRTC should be doing so that they respond in a timely way to the important issues that are before them?
22 seconds, Ms. R.
Try to be brief. Thank you for the question. I think it would be critical, first of all, for the Commission to report annually on how it is actually implementing Section 3.1 and also Section 5. If we don't know how it is doing its job, we're unable to put pressure on the Commission to actually change what it's doing. In terms of timing, the Commission currently publishes next to no useful information about the timing of its work, how it is actually achieving work. In some ways, one could argue that the information it provides Parliament now misleads people about what it is actually managing to achieve. We did provide detailed recommendations in our submissions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, there's such a short time for everyone to get into the nitty-gritty of what they really want to say. So I'm very sorry about that. It is now noon, colleagues. We finished our first round, and we're going to have bells at 12:30. So I think we have room for a second round. And so what I'd like to do is to begin the second round now, which is a 5-minute round. And I begin with Mr. Waugh for the Conservative Party.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to pick up with the Forum for Research and Policy. So it's been 17 months and we still haven't heard boo from the CRTC on the licensing of CBC, our national public broadcaster. I will say next month, June, it'll be a full year and we're still waiting for a 3-digit suicide helpline. These are two examples that the CRTC isn't doing their job today, and yet, Ms. Auer, I think you've hit it right on. With a staff of 650 plus, they still are not capable of doing what they should be capable in the Broadcast Act. And I just want you to expand on that because I have talked excessively about the CRTC. They cannot handle today's facts, and yet we're going to be piling this on, C11 plus, it looks like C18. Your thoughts, please.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Waugh. I am echoing. I don't know why.
If those on the floor can please turn off your mics, it would stop the echo, I think. Begin again, Ms. Orr.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Waugh. Yes, in terms of the CBC decision, it's bizarre that it's taking this long. I have no reason to explain it. I should tell you, having worked at the Commission, I admire so many of the Commission staff working under difficult times, especially during the pandemic. But really, leadership, as I understand it, comes from the top. And if the Commission itself, the commissioners, are not requiring timeliness, I don't think we can blame the staff for that. I'd like to also mention that my data which I had looked at for the CRTC, showed that from 2000 to 2021, the Commission staff had increased by a quarter, from 400 to more than 500. So there are resources there. The Commission also got additional funding just to help it begin to do this. And Chairperson Scott also addressed the fact that he had allocated 100 people to start preparing for C11. However, the fact remains that when you try to find out what the Commission is doing, it is difficult to find out. And why is that? Why can't we actually have ongoing regular reports from the Commission about what it is doing? When you think about the issue of transparency as well, because timeliness is really in a way part of transparency, why is it that we actually just don't know today who is making decisions at the Commission? The Commission's process or of making decisions changed after the 1982 Charter. That's why in the 1991 Act, there's a requirement that they who hear decide. The problem is that it's the chair who decides who decides. That means that, in fact, independence of the Commission is compromised. And I'm echoing again, I'm sorry.
Oh, that was my fault.
I'll speak more quietly.
No, that was my fault. I only got 5 minutes. So I want to move on, if I can, to Mr. Rogers. Ronnie Hawkins died yesterday. Is he a Canadian or is he an American?
I thank the member for the question. I think that's as of right now on radio, that is determined by the CRTC. But obviously, his commitment or his contribution to the music industry is important. I think you raise an important part about what will regulation of music look like, who will decide who is Canadian. And I would just say that our members and Music Canada look forward to taking part in those discussions with the CRTC, as long as there's an understanding that necessarily starting with radio is not, the radio rules is not necessarily where we need to begin, and that the answers are not algorithmic, and that they're platform by platform.
Yeah, I think you're right on. I worry about radio. Streaming has taken over. You had the numbers there. The radio industry, I think, if you look a few years down the road, may not even be accessible in this country. And it's something that the music industry in this country over the decades has really relied on the old radio. But it's done now, as you gave some great stats on streaming and how well Canadian stars are doing streaming.
So we're 100% clear. I don't think I'm here to say radio is dead. Radio is still an important part of our business, but it is. We are now at Canada's now at 2 billion streams a week, and we're excited by that. And I think there's an amazing amount of opportunity to be found there. English and French and Indie and Major. This is something we can all be excited about.
Thank you very much, Kevin. With that radio voice of yours, I think we want to see radio continue. And now I go to Mr. Lewis for the Liberals. For 5 minutes, Tim.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank all of our witnesses. I appreciate your time and being here. I would continue that conversation with Mr. Rogers, but first I wanted a chance to talk to the Independent Broadcasters Group, specifically Mr. Fortune. There have been some voices who claim that the Online Streaming Act would somehow give some sort of unprecedented control over what content that we see online. And right now, these companies are, well, could you comment any further on the power that the platforms currently have now as gatekeepers for access to programming and services? And how, as the system exists now, they already can exercise those preferences or even the discrimination?
Thank you. Yes, that's a very important point. Sorry, thank you for the question. That's a very important point. So again, when we're talking about online platforms, we're talking about services like Roku or others that provide access for third-party programming services to reach the public. And to be distributed on a platform, one must reach an agreement with the provider of the platform for access to the public. These are not social media services. You don't get to put up content on your own. You have to negotiate and obtain their consent to access the public. So I think the best example given last week was by Mr. Danks, who's explained in his Out TV is a Canadian LGBTQ programming service, and it has a strong presence around the world. It's one of the leaders in Canada and going around the world, providing Canadian programming around the world. And he's described how he's had issues gaining access to certain large online platforms for his service precisely because it is LGBTQ content. That's the sort of control issue that online platforms have, because you don't get to upload your own content. You have to license it to the platform, reach an agreement, and they control very much the audience that sees your content. So it is important for Canadian services to have meaningful access and to be treated fairly by these platforms. That's what we're seeking.
Great, thank you for that. If I can turn to Mr. Rogers from Music Canada, representing Sony, Universal, and Warner. Thanks again for being here. You know what? We had spoke briefly about the Canadian content rules for traditional radio and how it has supported our artists over the year. In your opinion, would the music industry be the same if we did not support those Canadian artists with the CanCon rules we had on traditional radio? Would they have the same commercial success? And can you kind of just take a higher level approach and say how that CanCon and radio has made a difference in protecting our cultural sovereignty?
I mean, as I said in my opening statement, that this is very much the bedrock of the Canadian music industry, which is led by the majors. And we partner in distribution with indies and publishers. We make up the ecosystem. And those regulations have helped provide that. Now, the internet is a very different place than radio, and the services that are provided digitally operate in a different function. And so I'm not immediately convinced that what works in one place will work in the other. But at the core, when I hear the minister talk about the goals, I think the minister has it right. The desire for accessibility, but not necessarily pushing, is something that we would strongly support.
Thank you. And just to follow up, we've talked about artists moving over to streaming, and that growth of industry has certainly benefited the platforms. And you mentioned some of the international artists, but not all artists are experiencing that surge in the revenues. Would you agree that a larger fund available to Canadian artists, especially if there were extra contributions that came from foreign-owned streaming giants, in addition to the funding that the traditional Canadian companies are already contributing, would you agree that would definitely support our whole ecosystem from top to bottom?
I mean, Madam Chair, I'm happy to thank you for the question. I think obviously government funding has played an important role, or government-mandated funding has played an important role in the music ecosystem. But I would also point out that there's also great success in the industry as well. The internet has removed a lot of gatekeepers, and so those who kept artists off the radio, those artists are now able to go to different platforms and put their music out there and connect directly with their fans. That doesn't mean you can create fans that aren't there, but you can go and find them, and you can break out, and you don't have to break out locally. You can break out internationally, and so I think that's one of the wonders of the system now. And I think it's one of the things that Canadians are finding great success in, connecting in pockets, not just in Toronto or Montreal or Vancouver, but they're finding success all around the world.
Thank you very much. And that time, the time is up, Ms. Lewis. And I'm going to go now to Mr. Champeau for 2.5 minutes. Martin?
Merci, Madame la
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will have quick questions. First of all, to Mr. Ferris. Disney, you were talking about the productions with Canadian talent, recent productions. So what I would like to know is that who holds the rights to these productions? Is it Disney?
Largely Disney, because these are our own produced productions, yes.
Monsieur Ferris, combien des productions?
Mr. Ferris, how many of the productions you produce in Canada are in the original French language over the recent years?
Well, when we launched Disney Plus in Canada in November 2019, and we've launched in other markets around the world.
Monsieur Ferris, combien?
Mr. Ferris, how many productions of Disney in Canada over the recent years have been made in the original French language? It's not just a straight answer, if you will, please.
Currently, our productions in Canada are in English, but we are very proud of what we do in Quebec. And I would like to just highlight those, if I can. Barkskin's The Story.
Oui, mais je suis tout à fait d'accord.
I do agree with that, but it was a simple question just to underline maybe the importance of protecting things that are maybe less lucrative for companies, but culturally important for Quebec and for Canada. I would like to talk with Mr. Rogers, Music Canada. Mr. Rogers, the music industry in Quebec and Canada has undergone a significant transformation with the digital giants arriving, and I'm happy to hear that music companies have found additional income resources, Sony, Warner, Universal, and others. The artists who live on their music, who do not sell CDs, because you would know this best. Disc CD sales are very low now. There was a Quebec artist who had 1 million views of one of the songs who received maybe $500. Now, companies found something advantageous in this model, but what happens with the artists? How do we improve the income of artists in this universe?
30 seconds.
I think this is one of the most important parts that our members play with the partnership with the artists. As you know, Quebec, the pickup of streaming in Quebec was generally low compared to other parts of Canada. Those numbers are changing, and our members specifically are excited about the opportunity to partner with wonderful Quebec artists and bring the best of streaming and the best of Quebec culture to the world.
Monsieur Rogers.
Mr. Rogers, Madam President will cut me off, but...
30 secondes, Madame.
I'm sorry, Martin, but that your time
merci.
is up. Mr. Julian, for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm going to give Mr. Rogers an opportunity to answer. That was an important question. On how artists can actually be adequately remunerated for the work that they produce. You mentioned, Mr. Rogers, that the numbers are changing. Do you have numbers that you could provide to the committee?
Madam Chair, I think ultimately the streaming platforms would be the best to provide that information in terms of their customers and where they're at. We know that there's a lot of opportunity throughout Canada, and particularly in Quebec.
Okay. When you say that the numbers are changing, though, that is an important point for the committee to consider. And if you have any additional information to provide to the committee, that would be helpful. I also understand from your comments that you're very supportive of the provisions of 31F around Canadian employment. You cited Music Canada and the number of jobs in Canada. Could you comment a little bit more about the importance of having Canadians employed in industries and making sure that there are benefits that go to Canadians right across the country?
I thank the member for the question to talk about this. I think Canada's major labels are success stories in this space. We employ Canadians in offices in Toronto and Montreal, full of Canadians making Canadian music for the Canadian market and around the world. It's of note because often our members are not necessarily the clients of Canadian Heritage due to the ownership structure, but it's nice to see that that the structure that we have is the structure that the government is pushing on other players. And I think it's important because it's important to have people on the ground thinking about what's important in the Toronto market or in the Canadian market broadly. And we've seen the benefits of that, and we look forward to discussing that further.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Peter, you have 11 seconds. 9 seconds, 8 seconds now. So I think.
Well, then I will take that opportunity to say that I think the committee has been advised by numerous witnesses that the importance of maintaining Canadian employment, and so that's something that we will have to consider moving forward.
Thank you very much. And I go to the Conservatives for 5 minutes. Mr. Uppel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to start off with Disney, and I mean, I'm hearing from, just hearing from you about the Canadian content that's or Canadian stories that you have produced. I would think that would be a dream scenario for someone that wants to have any story to be told and have Disney to tell it. And then also the job creation in Canada. I know provinces like Alberta, my home province, is working really hard to get major productions to come to the province and to create those jobs. So, and that's all being done, without C11. So, what is it that would bring a major international brand to Canada, not only to create jobs but also to create stories, Canadian stories?
Thank you very much for the question, MP Paul. But I hope that I demonstrated in my opening remarks that we already are investing heavily in Canada, and we hope to be able to invest more in Canada. I would say we're investing in Canada because it's a great market to invest, whether it is production or whether it is producing our own facilities or infrastructure in the marketplace with the virtual production stage that ILM is producing in Vancouver. So it's a good market today. What we are hoping is that Bill C11 will preserve a level of flexibility such that we can continue to invest in the best way that we can contribute to the Canadian ecosystem based on the nature of our services. So it's really a flexible regime that we're seeking because we all do great things, but we do things differently. And we would just like to be able to maximize our investments by allowing us to do what we do best in the marketplace.
Thank you. Just want to switch over to Patrick. Patrick Rogers, in many situations when we're looking at international trade discussions, if one country has some type of protective regime, other countries may respond. Are you concerned at all that other countries may respond with what type of content that their population starts to see? Because there's so many artists, especially new artists, and especially artists that are Canadian artists but have a let's say a cultural background that's they might be from the Philippines or from India, or I know a lot of Punjabi singers are getting. Canadian Punjabi singers are getting massive views on their YouTube videos, and a lot of it's not only Canadians, but it's from around the world. So is there a concern that that part of it might be restricted? Because I'm hearing from some people who are from different cultures and communities that this would actually hurt them and sort of hurt their discoverability.
Madam Chair, I thank the honourable member for the question. Canadian music is global music. Canadian music is available to the whole world, and we spend a lot of time, our members spend a lot of time, the government of Canada has spent a lot of time exporting that music around the world, and has done so under the premise that the music is available through the internet in a global fashion. So I think anybody in a commercial space is concerned about the idea of raising guardrails up, even well-meaning ones here, that encourage blocking Canadian content elsewhere. I think your comments about diasporas and Canadian diasporas are very well made, and it is something that I think I would encourage the committee to think about carefully, and I foresee needing to spend quite a bit of time at the CRTC in the future on.
Thank you. And Patrick, how do you think, like right now, you've talked about a number of Canadian artists who have great success online. How are Canadians finding them? Like, what are they doing? How are they finding them? Right now, without C11, how are we getting these millions and even, I think you mentioned somebody with billion views? How is that happening?
Had someone ask me this question.
40 seconds?
In 15 seconds, I will tell you everything I know about it. The biggest point about streaming and in the digital space is your ability to engage with your fans directly. And that is as true for Drake and Bieber as it is for my daughter Grace's favorite group, Splash and Boots. And one of the wonderful things about streaming is that as you put that information in, they will push back information to you that allows you to find more of that. And so my daughter, through watching or through listening to Splash and Boots, discovered Sharon, Lois, and Bram. And that was the algorithm that did that. That wasn't me. So Skinny Marinky Dinky Dink lives on another generation and Canadian content at that.
Thank you very much. Now I'm going to go to Mr. Biddle for the Liberals for 5 minutes, Chris.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My questions will be directed to Ms. Auer. At a recent conference organized by the CDEC, you stated an interesting point about the current Broadcasting Act, that Section 4 sub 2 of the current 1991 Act explicitly confers to the CRTC regulatory jurisdiction over all broadcasters operating in Canada, both in whole, like the CBC or CTV, or in part. You've stated that in these last two words, in part, effectively include all online broadcasting platforms within the 91 Act. Can you expand on this or explain this?
So much for the question. I think we're looking at an act that was devised basically beginning in 1985, before the internet had actually become more than a gleam in Al Gore's eye. So at that time, the idea was that transmissions were coming from the United States and even from Mexico, and Parliament wanted to ensure that it had control over its sovereign territory, including the transmission of signals. Perhaps that's because Parliament wanted to ensure that Canadian programming that was being transmitted was available to all Canadians, and also perhaps it wanted to ensure that it could control the content that was available. These days, however, the legislation is still intact, and Parliament has chosen not to say, all you're going to control is programming that takes place in its totality within Canada. So having distinguished between in whole or in part, it's up to the courts to some extent to decide what that in part means. But I think I've
asked you in terms of it's as a lawyer I can appreciate it's ultimately up to the courts and ultimately up to 9 people down the road. But your belief was the legislation does confer that, and ultimately the CRTC hasn't regulated in this ballpark to date. Is that a correct assessment?
Well, no, because it's decided to exempt online broadcasting from regulation. Having decided to exempt, it's asserted its jurisdiction. So it does have jurisdiction over broadcasting online. That's not to say that it has jurisdiction over the entire internet, just broadcasting.
Okay, thank you so much.
I think I'm frozen.
I think you are frozen. We can still hear you, so perhaps I will press on. There have been some incorrect interpretations of C11. This isn't directed at you, but to some other opponents, many across the way, that relate to user-generated content. Some even going so far as to say cat videos will be taxed. Many have focused on Clause 4.2 to overstate the scope of the bill. There are 12 different places in the Act that exclude social media users. Can you speak to those sections of the bill?
I'm not prepared to speak to in detail each of those sections, but what I am prepared to say is that from my perspective, C9 attempts to clearly regulate broadcasters, not individual users. But there's a distinction. It is able to regulate broadcasters that carry content provided by users. So it is very clear that it is not directly regulating users, but it is also clear that it has the power to regulate the platforms that carry users.
How much time do I have left, Madam Chair?
1 minute.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I guess just to follow up in terms of the minister's statement and the direction of the bill and what's been stated in the House and from our party, and that there will be policy directives coming forward. If there are policy directives that specifically scope out user-generated content, can you speak to the CRTC and that will prohibit them from scoping it back in?
No, I don't think it would, because first of all, I have a great deal of admiration for the legal minds at the Commission. If they really want to do something, I think they'll find a way. The second point is that the Commission has already regulated essentially users of the broadcasting system through the 1988 online programming guidelines. The Commission did not regulate individuals calling into phone-in shows. It simply regulated the broadcasters' decisions to carry specific individuals calling in. So it did indirectly what it chose not to do directly. That's the point. All you have to do is get the platforms in a room, ask them to develop a code of conduct, and then have somebody enforce a code of conduct whose effect is to regulate users.
Thank you very much. That fits the time very nicely. And now we have come to the end of this second round. And I think we may want to chance beginning of the first round. And if everyone wants to have some time, how about my asking if we could go to a 3-3-2 round.
Point of order.
How does everyone feel about that, Peter?
Thank you. Just on a point of order, Madam Chair, Heather McPherson, a very capable member of Parliament for Edmonton Strathcona, will be replacing me on committee for the final few minutes.
Thank you, Peter. Welcome, Ms. McPherson. So I shall begin then with, for the Conservatives, for 3 minutes, I will go with Ms. Thomas.
Point of order, Madam Chair. Did you say we were changing the time from 5 minutes to 3 minutes?
From 5 minutes to 3 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, and 3 minutes.
And from 5 minutes?
Yes.
And what's the logic behind that?
I think Mr. Junior will tell you the logic behind that is that I think that there may be a vote, and in case there is a vote, we will not be able to finish, and I want everyone to have a chance to finish this round. That's all.
But would it be a 30-minute bell, and would it give us how many minutes is the bell? The bell's going to be.
Well, when the bell begins, I will ask for unanimous consent to continue for another 15 minutes. Now, if we do that,
we would be able to have enough time, right?
No, because 15 minutes will give us 10 and 10, 20 and 5:25. We would not have time to finish. That's why I moved it so it could fit the time. Thank you, Michael. All right. Ms. Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question is for Mr. Ferris with Disney Canada, or with Disney, the Disney company. Mr. Ferris, I'm hoping that you can perhaps just talk a little bit about the extent to which Disney has gone in order to generate Canadian content, or content that would support Canadian creatives.
Well, as I mentioned, I believe in an earlier question in my response, we believe that every production that we produce in Canada contributes to the health of the Canadian ecosystem, because we're training Canadian talent and we're producing infrastructure in the marketplace. Over and above that, in my opening statement, I outlined the 3 examples of Canadian stories that we have produced in Canada: Barkskins, Turning Red, and Washington Black, which is still in production.
Mm-hmm. I was hoping that perhaps you could go into a little bit more detail in terms of your intentionality behind supporting Canada in this way.
Well, thank you for asking that question, because one of the things I did want to say was that we launched Disney Plus in Canada in November 2019, and we've launched in other foreign markets since that time, and we continue to launch in other markets. And we've we've understood from our subscribers that they like local content on our service as a supplement to the global content that fits into the 6 brands that make up the totality of Disney Plus, which, as I have mentioned, is unique compared to our competitors in the marketplace. So as we speak, we are actually developing a Canadian programming strategy right now for the Walt Disney Company, and that is being conducted by my colleagues in Canada in the Walt Disney Company. So we are looking toward the development of a local Canadian programming strategy indeed.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. No, that's great. So in your mind then, if Bill C-11 were to come into effect, would it help you generate more Canadian content, or would it hinder the good work that you're already doing?
I would argue that we are already producing a significant amount of content in Canada with $3 billion of spend in the marketplace over the last 3 years. So there is a massive amount of production. We, but from the market, are being driven to develop local content. So I think it's actually the market that's driving us to do a lot of these things. And it's ultimately up to the committee to determine if and how we're regulated. If you do choose to regulate us, we ask for that to be flexible so we can continue to maximize our investments in the marketplace.
Thank you, Mr. Ferris. So what I hear you saying is that the market is magical. And when there is demand for something, which there appears to be demand for Canadian content, the celebration of Canadian artists and the possibilities that exist here within Canada to be realized, given that there is demand for these things, Disney is responding and going in that direction. Is that correct?
Indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you,
think
Mr. Ferris.
the time is up, and I'm going to go to Mr. Coteau for 3 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair. And I'll continue with David from Disney, Mr. Ferris. So first of all, I just want to say I think everyone in this room appreciates the work that companies like Disney does in Canada, the investments into our economy. We know that a lot of people get hired, a lot of the production increases, and it generates more tax revenue. So we're very grateful for the work that your company does. But the size of a company like Disney, the impact it has, the fact that it does production and it controls platform as well, it makes it really difficult for small and medium-sized companies, production companies in Ontario and other parts of Canada to compete in this space. And that's why the Canadian content piece is such an important piece. Companies like Disney's do benefit millions of dollars go in back into the company for film and television tax credits from many different provinces. My question to you, David, is how would you expect small and medium-sized production companies to compete in the same space as Disney in Canada if there's not incentives like the Canadian content incentives, and everyone was kept at equal playing field when companies like Disney they have a massive $3 billion spend is incredible over 3 years, but they also controlled the platform. How do small and medium-sized production companies compete in the same space as yours if there's no distinction between the two?
Thank you for the question. I mentioned 2 local production companies that we work with in Canada, and what we've done is we've helped build up those local independent production companies in Canada. And when we've worked with those production companies, they've built that expertise. When they go and pitch their stories to others, they have the fact that they have worked with Disney behind them, and that's real boost to them. And I think we see our work in the marketplace being complementary to what goes on in the local marketplace. And as I said, we're looking to develop a local content strategy. We're doing that right now. Sorry.
You don't think there should be any distinction between a Disney and a small, medium-sized Canadian-owned production company? How do they compete in that same space? Is there no distinction? As Canadians, don't you think, and as Canadian lawmakers and regulators, don't you think we should distinguish between the two so it kind of creates a bit more fairness for Canadian-owned companies that want to grow in the space to end up being like a Disney one day?
Thank you. I hope that many of them become a Disney one day. So I guess I would differentiate. I have a question, I guess, to clarify something for you, if I might. And that is, Bill C-11 is going to regulate Disney Plus, not our production arms. So I think that those are two different things, are they not?
Well, Disney is a production
Thank
company
you,
and it controls a platform. But I do appreciate the work Disney does. Don't think for 1 second we don't appreciate the work you do here in Canada. You're investing, you're hiring, and you're growing the sector. So thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I now go to Martin Champeau for 2 minutes. Martin.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. 2 minutes is brief enough, but I will come back to Mr. Rogers. You were talking about the platforms that are partners of your organization, the majors, in fact. Would you be able to tell me the following? Do you think Francophone music is growing and is in good health in digital platforms?
Madam Chair, I thank the member for the question. To be clear, the digital platforms are partners with everyone in the space, not just the majors. Our colleagues in the independent space.
Yes, there are bells.
Yes, Chair, there are bells ringing.
Yes, so I will ask for unanimous consent to continue until we finish this round, please.
No.
That will only be that would only be 2 and 6, 8 minutes.
Sorry, Chair, but no.
All right.
La classe.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas.
Grande classe.
Then I'm very sorry, Monsieur Champeau, you are unable to ask your question. And I want to thank all of the witnesses for coming here today and for taking such a long time with us and answering a variety of questions. Thank you again. And so this meeting is suspended. Thank you.